So, how do you know if it is actually your personality talking or if it's just your trauma imprint? In this episode, that is exactly what we're going to help you get to know.
How can you actually know who you are if you're not being open and real with yourself about the things that have happened to you and the way that they shape you? You literally can't. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia. And I'm going to get us started with asking Bianca you a question because you and I adore the topic around trauma and we love discussing it. And
It's a weird thing to love, right? It's like, hey, tell me all the worst things that happened to you. I'm going to feed on it. It's like,
literally.
All right, you fucking weirdo.
Bianca, I remember listening to, it must have been The Power of Vulnerability with Brene Brown, you know, her audio recording. You and I have definitely
I was listening to that this morning.
So good, right? Oh, so good. I think it's in that series, the Audible specific one, where she talks about how she ran into someone, or maybe it wasn't where she ran into someone, but usually she gets asked like, oh, what do you do for work? And if she wants to engage in conversation, then she'll kind of go like, oh, I'm a storyteller and a researcher, versus like her experiences sharing. Actually, I studied shame and like people's repulsion to her. I feel like that's when people ask us like, oh, what do you do? Like, what are you interested in? And all that happy jazz. The same is true for us with trauma.
I'm a trauma therapist.
Like, right. I help people recover from trauma. And it's like, no, thanks. I don't have trauma, right? Because no one self-identifies. Just like in Brene Brown's work, very few people will self-identify with having shame or having shame take over their life and drive them. And same thing is true what we found and what the research continues to show. Thankfully, less now more than ever, but very few people actually identify with their own trauma and their own traumatic experiences. And we say that playfully, but there's a lot underneath that rock. I like to say, and we've both said in Out of the Mud, different things. If you have a brain and you have a pulse, you've experienced some degree of trauma. And I don't know what it is about our society that struggles to actually admit that. But that's not what we're here for. What we're here for is to really understand the difference between personality and traumatic responses or your trauma response. So Bianca, I wanted to get us started with asking you, like, considering the fact that you see clients and the curtain slowly gets kind of opened up even more and more within their life as they develop psychological safety and they develop trust with you as their therapist and they start to build little small wins. What have you seen or heard as like the story that people want to tell themselves about their personality when they first step into therapy?
What a good question. People want to believe that they know themselves way more than they actually do, and that they're making conscious decisions about their life and why they do what they do, say what they say, why they are the way that they are.
That song just came into my head. Say what you say, mean what you see, do what you say. Cause it's your life, gonna make your own rules and you got to. Okay. Anyways, it's a 2000 something song. Okay. Given what you just said, why is it that people want to believe that they know more about themselves than they actually do? Because I've seen this too. Behind the scenes with people one-on-one. I've seen this with couples, and I've seen even the dynamic of the dyad between a couple, that even the couples want to tell themselves a story that they know their partner more than they actually do, and vice versa. So it's not just in a one-on-one setting. We see this in families.
Everybody does this.
Yeah, everyone. So I'm curious to hear your perspective before we really start to dive into the primary meat and potatoes of this episode. Like, why do you think that is? What's your current hypothesis?
It's thick.
And thank you for letting me put you on the spot here.
I'm glad that you are. It's making me have to think in real time.
It's good.
I think people have a really hard time believing that they're not in control of their life. I think people have a really hard time believing that they don't have quote unquote free will and that they are not making conscious choices and that they are not as like certain of themselves or other people or the world as they've tried so hard to convince themselves of. Because what does that mean? Like, what does it mean if I'm running on autopilot? What does it mean if I'm not the person that I've convinced myself of? That's when people have midlife crises or quarter life crises, or, you know, that's when people have a severe mental health challenge come up, or when, you know, shit really
Emotional
starts to hit the
breakdown.
fan. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, nothing was actually real. Nothing was the way that I thought it was. And people just burn down from that.
Yeah.
So that is my short answer to your question.
Cool. Yeah. Current hypothesis is that we have some degree of an emotional psychosocial crisis when we really have to look in that mirror of the story that we've told ourselves about ourselves isn't maybe fully true. Or a word that I was using on a client call this week that you might appreciate is incomplete. The data that we have about ourselves, or the story that we have about ourselves, is incomplete. And I think that that can feel like a warm, fuzzy blanket because it kind of lets us off the hook of, okay, I maybe created this narrative about myself and really struggle to want to look in the mirror of some of these things. And the wrestling with that existential crisis, or the ego death that really kind of happens when you start to recognize that the narratives that you've built, you've also, you know, been the author to that, and that's based on your perspective of your life experiences, and it might not be a fully complete picture, right? So cue the person kind of using this client who in high school, they were by force needing to switch schools. It was like right between middle school and high school. So that's a big transition anyways. But when you are a child and you don't really have the input, essentially, because your parents have to switch jobs, and you get broken up with essentially by your friends because they know that you're going to be leaving to a new school, and that quote unquote friendship breakup ends up planting a seed about other people and about yourself and about the world at large. That is a seed of belief that you are someone who is unlovable or unworthy or undeserving of love. And that quote unquote core belief that you have about yourself, while it might be in the moment helping you to grapple with the control and certainty that you want to cling on to, what that ends up doing, fast forwarding, you know, a year, you don't actually develop intimacy with other people. And then fast forward 40 years later and you're still single and don't know actually how to form a really deep, intimate connection. And you're asking why? And the why is because you at the deepest levels needed control back then when your friends were breaking up with you and you didn't have any. And so the story that you've been telling yourself for the last 40 years has been based on that rejection and that rejection sensitivity that you had felt emotionally at that time and place. So what do, right? Who have you become? What skills have you developed or underdeveloped as a result of that quote unquote incomplete data point of that experience? It's wild.
Yeah, it is. I actually had a really similar conversation with a client of mine a couple of weeks ago who so when he was growing up, his dad was in the military. So they had to travel all over the place. And he
Yikes.
learned from a really young age, don't attach to things, because in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, whatever, you're going to have to pick up and move. And so you're never going to actually be able to build deep, meaningful relationships. So don't even bother. He had no idea that that actually also translated to hobbies. He was very certain of that from a relationship standpoint. So he was very open about the fact that like, I really have a hard time making relationships and I honestly don't want to. And I'm married and I love my wife, but I don't want to make friends because
Yeah.
I'm not certain that it's going to be safe. I'm not certain that they're going to stay.
Right.
So he was very certain of that. But when he was entering into college, he wanted to study astronomy.
Cool.
And he had a really bad incident happen in his life and he had to stop school. And then he ended up like failing out of the program because of it and whatever. And we were kind of putting the pieces together. And I was like, okay, well, it's improbable that you would be able to pursue that as a career now. But could you do that as a hobby? Could you maybe like get a telescope or see what's
Nice.
out there for you or what other ways you can get invested in this? And he was
There you
like,
go, Bianca.
yeah, okay, whatever. So he comes back the next session and I asked him about it. And I was like, how did it go? Did you end up doing anything? Did you do your
Nice.
research like we talked about what available options there are? And he's like, no, I have this really big resistance to it.
Whoa.
So we're going through it, we're unpacking it, and we end up realizing that he doesn't invest in any hobbies anymore because he had to let go of all of the hobbies that he engaged in every time he moved. So he got really good at the violin. He had to stop because he lost his favorite teacher. He was in all of these different clubs. He stopped doing any of them and stopped trying to join new ones every time he moved. And he never put two and two together.
Wild.
There's so many people that are doing this. We're doing things in our life and we think we know why we're doing it. We think we know why we are the way that we are. We think we know how we show up and why and the way that we're living our life. And if you have a good therapist or coach or someone that you're working with, you kind of start to see, oh, I haven't been living my life consciously at all. At all. I don't know why I made the decisions I made. I thought I made it because of this, but oh my God, did I do that?
That's terrifying.
Because
when
of
you're in
that other
spot.
thing? It's so
Yeah.
scary. I've been there.
Right.
How many times have you and I been on a call and I'm
Same.
like, are you out of your mind? What?
Because all of what you know as reality, I call it emotional scaffolding. We've talked about this before, but like all of that crumbles underneath you. And like, I just picture like being in a dark room naked and afraid and you have no idea what the noises are outside. Like that's what it feels like inside of your head and your somatic experience. It's wild.
It's like everything you thought you knew isn't real anymore. And so now you're questioning literally everything. The amount of times that I've gotten off of my own therapy calls or coaching calls or whatever, and I'm questioning the entire world now. It's like everything wasn't true. Everything now is like not what I actually thought it was. And it's like, yup, welcome.
I thought cows were purple, not brown and white.
Yeah.
No, but that's really, really cool. And I'm glad that those two clients are kind of coming forward in this episode because I would love to dive even deeper because for those of the listeners who are hearing this and maybe who want to dip their toe into this, Bianca, like first of all, shout out to you. Kudos to you. That client is really very lucky to have you because of how you just connected a dot that person would never connect on their own, despite what they want to tell themselves. Yeah. And that is truly one of the most incredible benefits of having someone in your corner that gets to hear not only the stories that you're telling yourself, but the stories, the in between, the story gaps, and who can observe you in real time and give you feedback on the narratives that you generate, that you tell, that you want others to believe. Like it's just so powerful because dots can be connected by extremely skilled professionals. And so when we talk about understanding a trauma response, or when we share the difference in the nuances between trauma responses and personality, I think to dig even deeper using these two clients that you and I both have, I think that those will be really great examples to highlight some contrast. Let's share definition about what is personality and how does personality differ between a trauma response. You and I, we don't have to get Merriam-Webster in this hitch, but what
I know you want to. I know you're itching to pull up ChatGPT or the definition.
I don't want to. I want us to generate our own evolved specific lingo based on what we've learned from this community, what we've learned in the research that's built this community, what we've learned in working with real people with real lives and real businesses and real relationship and real family challenges and struggles. So let's start with personality.
Cool.
What's a shared definition that you and I can have about personality?
The story you have about yourself.
Okay. Okay. What I would share and add to that as like the kind of upstream, which the story you have results from. We were just talking about self-esteem in group coaching. And that was something, shout out to you, you know, if you're listening, who you are. You asked a great question, which was, what's the difference? I don't think I'm understanding the difference between these two elements, self-esteem, and I think it was self-confidence that she was asking. And we went into self-esteem and essentially the generalized feeling that you have about yourself. And personality is kind of that element of self-esteem. You get to see the downstream story that you're telling yourself as a result of what I believe personality is, and what I've seen it to be is those core aspects, those core traits that you have within you that don't really change over time. And there's an exercise that, Bianca, we have done with so many people in the Evolve community, that the things that quote unquote don't change as a trait, there's core values, there's core aspirations, and there's core values. And personality, from my perspective, is the things that are core to who you are, that despite circumstances, those quote unquote stay the same. They might change. Is that
actually personality though?
So
I want to debate you on this for a little bit. Like,
go.
I want to rumble a little bit. My personality, who I was 6 years ago, is not the same person that I am today. Are you so like, what makes you say that personality doesn't change and that those are the core features? Because like, I think there are, be well.
Thank you.
I think there are parts of us, like our temperament, that probably don't change. Yes. And that we might have core components of us, like aspirations and just who we are without any influence and without any input from the world. Like there are some of those things that don't change, but you actually believe personality? And I'm not asking this from like you actually believe that? Like,
no, you're good.
I'm trying to learn from you in real time.
Always.
Why do you think personality doesn't change?
So I didn't necessarily say personality doesn't change. The traits can develop, the traits of your personality, aka what makes up your personality, the core of quote unquote who you are. So like, for example, there's someone that I'm thinking of who has always had a core trait to them that is unique to them, that you and I both know, who has a really big heart. They have a really loving heart. And that has not changed no matter what the circumstances have been. She, in that trait, has just, because of all the change that has happened in that personality trait that is very, I don't want to say unique to her, but definitely she has a trait within her personality that has her heart stand out in ways that is just so stunning. And the heart and the loving and the kindness and the caring goes deeper than most. And it's because of that personality trait that hasn't changed, no matter how battered she's been, no matter how many traumas she's experienced, no matter what people say about her, even though it's not true. That core personality trait has stayed the same. And from my perspective, at least the vantage point that I've had on her growth journey, it has been allowed through her own growth and development and psychological safety as a result of who she's chosen to surround herself with. It's been allowed to actually become more of who she is, and she's been able to step more into that, because at one point her personality traits were not accepted by her family, were not accepted by her culture, were not accepted by the people who didn't know how to value that. And so when we talk about personality, I think it's the traits that are like seeds that never change per se at the core level, but I think they get evolved as a result of our circumstances.
Okay.
But it's interesting
And
too, and here's the thing. It might sound like I'm talking on two sides of my mouth, but what we do know about uh plasticity and whatnot. I love the fact that you brought temperament into this, because temperament is definitely a component. But I'm just going to keep it on the record there that personality traits are those traits about you that don't 100% change, even though they might evolve in the way in which they show up.
okay. I like that. Good.
Thank you for the press. I love it.
Thank you. Thanks for being willing to let me go there. So, your personality are the core components of you that are the fundamental aspects of you. They don't change completely, but they can evolve over time as your growth and as your progression occurs in life. The thesis that we are trying to make here in this episode, and what we're going to keep unpacking, is a lot of people have really terrible things happen to them in life. They'll go through trauma, they'll have really devastating experiences. Like these two clients, they have really major challenges happen, and they start to believe this is who I am, because they act based on those traumas, they act based on those experiences. The story about themselves, the world, and other people therefore changes as a byproduct of that. And then they start to believe this is who I am, this is what the world is, and this is what's always going to be possible for me.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is that that is a misrepresentation of your personality. That's not actually who you are. It's who you've mistaken yourself to be because of the things that have happened to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like this client, my client had the story he had about himself and his personality was that he's not someone who likes hobbies.
Right.
That's not true. And when we unpacked it, it ended up being, oh my God, I'm grieving. I'm grieving the loss of all of the activities and the hobbies that I had to let go of because of all of the changes that happened in my life. And to make it easier on myself to not have to feel pain, I just stopped engaging in hobbies. And over the years, I've convinced myself that it's because I don't want them or like them, when the truth was I've been grieving. So he thought that that was a personality trait, and the truth was it was a trauma response.
Right. Right.
And we're all doing this all the time. We mistake these aspects of ourselves for our personality. And because we don't want to admit we have trauma, because we fear vulnerability, to what you were saying about Brene Brown, because we fear the feeling of shame and we don't want to go anywhere near it with a 50,000-foot pole, we never actually get to analyze ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror, physically or metaphorically, to have a deeper understanding of who we are, why we are, how we are, and the upstream measures that got us here.
Yeah.
When you're on a journey of self-discovery or self-rediscovery, it's very important to have a support system in place. And that's where a group like Evolve comes in, with their acceptance and advice and different people from different walks of life who can offer different perspectives for you to help you find your self-worth and aid in your journey of wellness. It's important and essential.
So the trauma responses, I had pulled up a digital asset that I use in my practice all the time with clients. And this one was interesting because it started to kind of pull into some of the different research that now is coming out. So let's distinguish what you just said there, 100% valid. And I want to move over to the trauma responses so that as listeners are listening to this, they can, in the two stories of people's lives that we're sharing, and in their own, they can kind of identify what their trauma response is, if they haven't already, and they can recognize the nuances and the difference that we're really highlighting, which is a trauma response is a behavioral experience that gets activated when you don't feel as though you have your safety and survival completely ensured. And there is a cue or a trigger that usually happens, or what's called an anchor trauma event, which then impacts the way in which your brain gets changed. And as a result of that, your quote unquote narrative making about yourself and your personality gets impacted as a result of that if you identify with your trauma. So people who experience trauma, I was saying this to a client who is a survivor of rape in the workplace. And I was saying that you have been absolutely victimized. Bianca, you had said something beautiful either on a podcast or on an IG live that I took and I shared with her and deepened it even more. And I had said, we might have been victimized through this person's actions, but you don't have to become a victim. A victim versus someone who is a victor of their trauma is the victim identifies and fuses with the identity of someone who's been victimized. So their trauma response of maybe the fawn response, which is just completely please and appease, that trauma response, then they start to tell themselves a story. But in all reality, they're trying not to get raped in the workplace again, or even come anywhere close to any sort of horrible experience that preceded as a result of the before and the after of that circumstance, that anchor trauma. And the story that that person tells themselves, this is where having people in your corner to be really mindful about the narratives that we're making and creating. If she had identified with the I am a victim mindset, that would totally change her life trajectory. She would mistake her personality or her trauma response for personality. But the difference is the victor doesn't fuse with their trauma, and they don't invalidate it either. They recognize that it happened to them. It absolutely changed a lot of things, including it could have impacted core personality traits. However, their trauma response in preceding moments doesn't have to become their personality, because that is where we get to step in and we get to get support of recognizing that that identity and that fusion is very much up to us. And that's why we need support.
Right. It's the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth.
Facts.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is this event happened to me, and the post-trauma that happens is what you do in the aftermath. Everything that happens to you in the aftermath of this really horrific thing that happened. What happens in your body? What's the story you tell yourself? What is your reaction to it? What's the support that you have and or don't have? How do you identify and fuse with it? In post-traumatic growth, it's, I had this traumatic experience. How can I grow from this? How can I learn from this? How can I become, a better human being as a byproduct of this? Not because I'm negating this thing that happened to me, but because I'm saying this horrible thing happened. What can I do? How do I get to another side? How do I get better? So that I can make sure that this never happens to me again. And so that I can make sure, if this is something that you want, that this never happens to somebody else that I love and care about.
And on top of that, how can I have this experience that has happened to me even crystallize and help me embody even more the personality traits, despite the fact that those personality traits might have actually attracted this type of circumstance. And I know that that is really difficult for trauma survivors because of the fact that it's like, well, I was too nice and that's what attracted this trauma to happen to me. And that nice personality characteristic, maybe it was a personality trait that allowed people, you did not see people accurately. But let's go even back. Where did that quote unquote personality trait come from? Was it because when you were really young, you had no room in your family to not be nice? Right? So this goes back. So different trauma responses. We know, categorically speaking, right, that the quote unquote go-to is the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. Those are the four quote unquote well-known, if you will, trauma responses. The fight, which is always getting activated, always going on the defense, always, grounding yourself and getting activated, fighting whatever perceived threat or a lack of safety you have, not running away from it, which is the opposite, flight, trying to avoid, duck and go, like I'm out, literally central nervous system getting you out of the perceived threat or situation. So the difference between someone who is trauma response reactively always having their fight response out, they go into work meetings, there's always a bone to pick. They're in relationships, there's always little nuances and little fights that happen over small things. Someone who's in a flight response is any conflict comes up, they don't want to ever be around it, work, family, otherwise. And then there's the freeze. And freeze goes into your entire central nervous system, freezes up. So when you are in conversations with individuals, or like, for example, I just had to ask Bianca those questions, and Bianca went towards those questions. She didn't freeze in her body, right, Bianca? You didn't just like totally freeze up and get, totally deer eyes. I don't know what to do. But some people do have that as a go-to trauma response because just being frozen was beneficial for them in that moment of safety and survival. But then there's the nuances.
It's where deer in the headlights comes in. It's this is where dissociation comes in. This is where complete shutdown happens. And this is why a lot of people will blame themselves and they'll say, well, I didn't fight back. You literally couldn't. Your body made you freeze and shut down, and you were like frozen in that moment.
Right. And what's interesting too is that you can be a high functioning quote unquote adult, so you can still perform tasks and still be in a frozen state, which is so fascinating, but we won't go down there. But then there's that please and appease, the fawn response, which is you just totally do anything to try to make sure that whatever perceived threat or whatever, that person tells themselves the story that they need to mask up or they need to make sure that everyone else's needs come before them. There's other trauma responses like the collapse and submit, the let me just attach and make sure that I cry for help and put the relationship first and cry for help as much as I can. But all of these trauma responses, right, all of them can become a story that we end up mistaking for our personality. So think about all of those different trauma responses. And Bianca, what I've found, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well, is that how we distinguish to really understand, what's speaking more, the trauma response that you have or the personality trait that is inherently within you, is recognizing your central nervous system and realizing that the intention of you showing up in a meeting, in a session, in or out in the world at large, the intention of how you show up, meaning the conscious thought that is applied in that very present moment, is really what separates you to be able to discern between whether you're in those traumatic responses or your trauma response versus a personality trait, and your personality trait is speaking. So like even a small example is you're in the grocery store, the person or the cashier asks you or asks one of our clients, do you want to donate? My client that I was talking about earlier, the one who had the rejection in the high school, his go-to quote unquote trauma response was fawn. So in that moment, what he's going to do is he's going to unconsciously mask up and say, yes, I want to donate. When in reality, his body is unconsciously perceiving that he will be rejected or thought less of if he doesn't say yes. So in that small little moment, the intention he has is pure, but the safety and survival mechanism that has his central nervous system going into masking up is what overrode the intention of his personality trait to be kind. What have you found?
No, that's great. I think a good framing question to help you identify whether this is your personality or a trauma response is, if I wasn't scared at all, if there were no consequences, if there was no harm for me acting and showing up the way that I actually want to, would I still do this behavior? For most people, the answer is no, which means that it's not a personality trait, it's a trauma response. If let's say someone identifies as a people pleaser and they're like, nope, that's who I am through and through. That's, I've always been a people pleaser. My mom is a people pleaser. My dad is a people pleaser. That's just who we are. It runs in our family. I'm like, okay. What if there were like no consequences at all? And someone comes up to you and they ask you something and like nothing would happen and you had every certainty in the world that you would be okay, that you could handle it, that no matter what, nothing would happen to you. It would be like beautiful sunshine and rainbows after you gave your honest answer. Would you still people please?
Mm-hmm.
I'm certain the answer is no. Which means it's not your personality, it's a response. It's something you've learned over a prolonged period of time to keep yourself safe.
Right. And that's where the context can really show you the differences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Context and how you show up in the world can really illuminate the behaviors that you conduct. That framing question is so powerful because of the fact that it helps you analyze the behaviors. And the behaviors are the quote unquote reaction or the response. And the difference is a response is something that you are consciously and mindfully attending to prior to activating. A reaction is your central nervous system's knee-jerk reaction based on its conditioning that came before. And so if you're just reacting and your behavior showcases that tells us that is your trauma response talking for you. And whether it be in the grocery line or whether that be in the drive-thru at Dunkin' Donuts, like beeping on the horn, like that, those little things come out in little nuanced ways, but we don't have to get a magnifying glass to really understand how our behaviors are showcasing, quite literally in real time at all times, either our personality or our trauma reaction. And so the third element that anyone listening to this podcast can use to distinguish, and at least for me, I've noticed this, and this one, to be fair, Bianca, I've had an interesting time, my personal experience with this, because of the fact that what this nuance helps us to see is, so these behaviors that we were talking about, right? Over time, do these behaviors perpetuate, meaning that, let's say, for example, your consistent masking up or your self-isolation, let's just say, has this been something that has been stable and rigid over time? So if you were to kind of clock your quote unquote last 5 years and you were to look at the behaviors that have been stacking up, what do they point to? Do they point towards this has been a very consistent, rigid behavior that's been stable over those 5 years? Or has it been up and down all around, all over the place? Because in those little nuances, you can see, I guess, the head of personality poking out or being wildly suppressed as opposed to the trauma response. So, and I'll go back to use this client as an example. This client, he has been over, again, I said 40 years, the longitudinal time frame, if you will, very rigid and very consistent about making sure that he never gets close to people. Now, that trauma response is a go-to and fawn and appease, but never get close, to make sure that he doesn't have any exposure into rejection or perceived rejection. Now, he very well has told himself a story that he actually doesn't get along with people, people don't like him, being him has consequences, all these narratives. But it's the rigidity that is in the behavioral experiences that he has. When we unpacked it, it was very obvious that, man, this is not your personality. This was not true to who you were. Because when we really start to peel back all of these really traumatic experiences to you, who you were at your core is someone who really craved deep connection, really craved being connected to other people, not just surface level connection. And so you can see that those personality traits were really suppressed over time by that traumatic reaction that he told himself a story was his personality.
100%. Because he had it for so much of his life, he believed so deeply that that was who he was, not realizing that if the circumstances were different, he wouldn't want to show up that way. His true self would actually come out, to use IFS parts language, and his true self would probably be radically different.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any nuance to this that you think would be helpful for the listener who might be sitting in this and kind of hearing our clients' stories and saying, yeah, but I've noticed that my trauma response, like, I don't have trauma. Like, is there any nuance to that person who maybe is struggling to identify with trauma responses?
Yes, you do. That's my nuance. Yes, you do. If you're alive and if you have a brain, you've had trauma. It just might, we have this very misguided notion of trauma. There's many different types of trauma. We are not talking about big T trauma that fundamentally shapes and alters the entirety of your life because this event was so drastic that it shook the foundations of your brain. That is one version of trauma. Emotional neglect is trauma. Not having your needs consistently met is trauma. It just looks different and it's smaller, but it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's still there. If you don't want to use the word trauma, then say stressors, then say life challenges, then say whatever, but like nobody gets out of here scot-free or whatever the term is. Like we all go through shit. And if you're refusing to actually see the fact that you've had shit happen in your life, then it's a huge indicator that you're running away and you're avoiding. And your personality is nothing's ever happened to me. That's a trauma response. So we get back to the beginning. And we're not trying to call anybody out because we've done it too. You used to be super avoidant and you thought it was a personality trait, and I used to be the biggest fawner and appeaser and people pleaser of all time, but I also had pufferfish, and I used to have fawn and fight, and I think you had, correct me if I'm wrong, you also had avoid, flee, and fight. And I sincerely believed that's who I was. Until I actually went to therapy and I actually navigated through my shit, and it was like, oh, yeah, that's not true. That's not true.
So what you just embodied a little bit earlier is something that then, kind of the question that is like, oh, that's not me. I don't have, it's like, Delulu is not the Salulu, nor is it a quote unquote trauma response. It hasn't been clocked as that, but I think there's what's
and
called
it will pursue.
I am clocking the term intrapersonal trauma, which is where one part deludes all of the other parts to believe and get on board with this narrative, otherwise get whipped into shape in your internal family system. But we'll save that for the research article that I'm reading. Okay.
Hold on. Emilia and I had a mutual client. So he's a client of mine, and he's doing group coaching right now. And we put this out in a previous episode, and he sent us a message saying that he was dying from this. So I need to say the whole sentence. The Delulu is not the Salulu. And if it continues to be the Salulu, it will ensusu, and it's going to ruin your fucking life. I added that last part.
Facts. You heard it here first.
Yeah,
the delusion is not the solution. Okay. That being said, our closing sentiments, I strongly encourage us to reanalyze our behaviors, because behaviors are a great surface topical level that helps us to kind of get underneath the quote unquote iceberg, or for lack of better words, underneath our own psychology. And there's so much gold to be had underneath where you dig, or the mirrors that you look in. There's so much opportunity for you on the table if you're someone that is really struggling and you're recognizing that life doesn't feel super in alignment, and you keep struggling to get where you want to go, or maybe you feel stuck. A lot of the times your behaviors can kind of be that trailhead that helps you understand a little bit more about yourself. And it's the parts of you that you've been running away from your whole life that one way, shape, or form will come back to haunt you. And it's better if you hear it from us. It's better if you take a more proactive approach towards your mental health, towards your parts, towards that internal component of your psychology, rather than to have something, again, horrible collapse in your world. And then all of a sudden, not only do you have to deal with that event on its own accord, but you also have to deal with all the crap that you never actually explored. It's like Marcus Aurelius, the unexamined life is not worth living. You will crash and go into this spiral if you're not examining the life that you're literally living, and your body's trying to process and your brain is trying to navigate and understand. And we don't need to be in this survival threat response loop, what we call the doom loop, again and again. It really doesn't need to happen, especially at this point in our species evolutionary from my perspective. So with that being said, if you like this episode, my suggestion for the next one is why you need self-accountability. This is episode 347. Really just sliding that over there. Bianca?
$3.99, why you still struggle to feel good enough. This one was a little thick. These topics are heavy, but like this is the foundation of all of our lives. And to put this on a little bit more of a serious note, like if we do keep trying to delude ourselves into the idea that nothing is wrong and we're fine and everything is okay and I don't struggle and I don't have issues, we do see these cycles repeat over and over and over again. And our sincerest intention, it's not to call people out, it's to call you forward to make these really wonderful changes for you that, yes, they suck when you're in the middle of doing it, but the life that you will get to have and the person that you will be able to come as a byproduct of you doing the work that you've been afraid to do is sincerely mind-blowing. And I say this as somebody who went from and I say this with like as much compassion as I can humanly muster. I was a loser. I was so incompetent. I was so incapable of anything. And now I have more self-confidence and self-belief than I ever imagined was possible because I did the work. And it is possible for everybody else too. I know your circumstances are different. I know we're 2, 3, 17 different people, but the principles are still the same.
Call it, girl.
All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please reach out and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.